Очікувайте ги легендарните Duran Duran 7 юли, Скопско кале.
Are you aware of the fact how many fans you have in this country, especially in Skopje? I can confirm that Skopje is definitely a city of Duran Duran.
Well, I'm thrilled to hear that. Obviously, we're very excited to be coming because we've never played there in our entire careers, and it's always nice to go somewhere new, and especially if we realize there's some Duran Duran fans we can find there.
Yeah, they're all there and they're all waiting for you.
We're really genuinely excited, and it's come at a time in the tour in the summer where we will have been playing for a fair while together now over the last months, and so I think the show is really at its best.
You're on tour with a complete new album, but I'm sure we will hear some of the vintage Duran Duran songs.
Absolutely. You know, especially in somewhere where we've never played before, this will be the first introduction to our music in a live show. So it'll have material spanning our entire career and hopefully some songs that people may be familiar with.
I will stay on the topic of last album. You had Mark Ronson as a producer on All You Need Is Now. So Mark Ronson met you when he was a very young kid and became one of your biggest fans. So how was it to be produced by a fan?
Well, Mark is a great fan of music generally. He's got an incredible knowledge of music across all kinds of genres, from hip-hop to rock, pop, dance music, and he's also an extraordinary musician. So we first met him, I guess, about 4 years ago when we did a project together in Paris. I say first met him. We did meet him when he was very young. We actually we knew his parents. But when we worked with him, it was obvious straight away that he was the perfect balance for us because he understood everything. Being a fan, he knew everything about our music, but also he knew the things that he liked and the things that he thought our fans would like to hear. So he said, I want to make a Duran Duran record that Duran Duran fans are going to love. And I think that perspective was very helpful. He really zeroed in on different aspects of the way the band plays together that he felt were the strengths.
But on the album before, Red Carpet Massacre, you had Timbaland as a producer. So can you compare the collaboration between the former and the latter?
Well, for us, I think that the Mark Ronson collaboration was more successful. It sounds much more like a traditional Duran Duran album, but for these times. Whereas with Timbaland, it was more of an experiment, trying to fuse those sort of beats, those Timbaland beats, with the Duran Duran sound and see if we could come up with something very different. In that respect, I think it was very successful. We were able to make this interesting sounding album out of our collaboration, but from the point of view of our fans, I think it wasn't quite as successful because they generally didn't like the sound of it as much as they do with the new album.
I've heard this before, but I just wanted to hear your opinion. Do you feel that All You Need Is Now is somehow a follow-up of Rio?
Well, that was what was said early on. I think it was a comment Mark made about it. He came to us and he sort of said, look, what I want to do is those first two albums for me changed the way that I thought about music at that time. He said that I'd like to have heard another one that sounded a bit more like that had that sort of energy in it. And so that's where the comment really came from. I mean, obviously you don't physically set out to make a follow-up to an album you made 30 years earlier, or 28 years earlier at the time. But having said that, I think what we did do for the first time in our careers was really take a little look back and say to ourselves, all right, what were we doing then that would still be appropriate now? What kind of things were in our sound that connected with our audience? And so it was things like, for example, from my point of view, I started using a lot more electronic sequencers again, which I hadn't used very much for a few years. And then Simon stacked up his harmonies very much in the way that we did on the Rio album. And John and Roger went for dance grooves on pretty much the whole album, which is something, again, we hadn't done like that for quite a while. And so those things enabled us to focus on what the Duran Duran sound really was at the core, at the heart of it. So in that respect, I think there are definitely elements that are related to the Rio album.
Since you've mentioned how you inspired Mark Ronson, I'm sure and I know that you've inspired also dozens of other music bands around the world, such as Killers, Panic at the Disco, and many, many others. What do you think when you hear their music? Are you proud?
Well, I love the Killers. I think that they're one of the best bands to have come out of America in the last decade or so. You know, Brandon's got a great voice, and they've got a very energetic sound. When we first heard them, actually, Simon Le Bon was the first person to play them to me. He'd heard their first single, and he said to me, "You got to hear this track." He said, "I really love it. Listen to the energy in there." And he played it to me, and I sort of recognized a little bit of us in it somewhere, and I saw what he liked about it. It was exciting. A lot of music to me now does sound quite generic, particularly some of the dance music and R&B stuff. It's all in one sort of bandwidth. It doesn't really have that many dynamics in it, and it's not that exciting. It's the same sounds on everything. So when you hear a record, like the Killers' first record, it stood out. So if we had any influence over that, then yes, I'd be very proud.
And on the other side, who influenced you? Can we say that was David Bowie in a way?
Well, very much David Bowie, I think, would have been one of our primary influences, but we liked a lot of different types of music. I mean, ones that are often quoted and are very much true, the Sex Pistols, and it was punk rock generally, the Sex Pistols, the Clash, the Buzzcocks. That's what sort of, I think, gave us the energy and vibrancy we were searching for on the first few albums. It came from that scene when it was the first time we'd seen people that young on stage playing their songs and really connecting with people. And at the same time, disco was going on, which a lot of people didn't think was very cool. But when we heard things like Good Times by Chic and We Are Family by Sister Sledge, and of course Donna Summer's I Feel Love, which was an enormous influence on me personally, we realized there was something in that. If we could just cross that dance music with rock music and punk, then we might find a more unusual sound. And so yeah, there was a lot of influence. I mean, most of our influence came from the 70s, and then melodically, a lot of the iconic bands like the Beatles and the Doors. Simon's a big fan of Jim Morrison. For me, Kraftwerk were an important part, Giorgio Moroder. A lot of things. We're still big music fans, so between us, we consume a lot.
Can you name some of the brightest and the dullest moments of the band's history, like the biggest happiness or the biggest regret?
Well, to be honest, I don't really like to have regrets, because whatever mistakes we've made and things when perhaps the band has been in a not so successful period, either artistically or commercially, I think you learn a lot from those. So I can't say that I deeply regret any of them. I mean, certainly the Liberty album was one of the records where I feel it could have been better. And John and I have often talked about going back and actually doing a sort of redux version of it, because I think it was a much better album than it ended up being when it came out. It was in there, we just weren't able to capture it at that time. But then we learned from that album. We went back into the studio and we made what was our best album of the 90s, I think, the Wedding album, because we all got together and we thought, wait a minute, what didn't work on Liberty is we didn't refine the songs enough. We didn't spend enough time on lyrics. We didn't spend enough time actually orchestrating things. We didn't throw away enough of the things that were not really as good as they should have been. And so when we did the Wedding album, that paid off with songs like Ordinary World, Come Undone. They were definitely the best things we'd done for several years. So It's very difficult to pinpoint things too. It'd be easy for me to say things like Live Aid was obviously an enormous moment for any artist that was involved, because it was one of the days when music actually did change the world a little bit. Doing the James Bond soundtrack for A View to a Kill was a real thrill for us, because we all grew up and still are big James Bond fans. More recently, we made a film with the director David Lynch. It was quite amazing for us, because we'd all been fans since we were teenagers. I saw his first movie, Eraserhead, which had a pretty profound effect on me. I'd never seen anything so strangely beautiful. And I think throughout his career, David has produced remarkable work. So suddenly, 30 years into Duran Duran, we're making a film with David Lynch. That was a great moment. The last year has been pretty good for us, I have to say. The tour has been spectacular. We played lots of different places. We played in Coachella Festival in California, which is one of those massive festivals that we'd never played at before. That was really something. Obviously, doing the album with Mark Ronson, putting out the video for Girl Panic with all the supermodels was a special moment for us. It's been quite a year.
Yeah, last year when you've been honored with GQ's annual award for Man of the Year for Lifetime Achievement, you've mentioned that 2011 was one of the band's best years so far.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. You never know when these years are going to happen, and as long as you have the enthusiasm and the will to want to keep doing things, you can sort of direct your destiny somewhat. And in doing this album with Mark Ronson, we were determined to make it a great Duran Duran album. And I think we actually achieved it. You always set out with that in mind, but you never know at the end what it is you will achieve. And in this case, we really managed to reach all of our goals on it.
You created Duran Duran when you were 17. That means that you basically missed the teenage formative period of life, probably one of the most important parts of man's life. Because of that, I've heard that you never learned how to drive a car. So is there anything else that you missed from that period?
I did actually learn. When I was 16, I formed the band. I learned how to drive a car, and I took a test, but I failed my test very miserably. And I was quite cross at the time that I failed, because I didn't feel that I should have failed, because I drove perfectly well in the test. I just really felt that the instructor who was in charge of the test just didn't particularly like the way I looked. I think I failed on blonde hair and makeup rather than my driving skills. And I was so annoyed at that time, I thought, right, I'm just going to get on with things. I'm going to have to afford to be able to get on trains or taxis or, better still, limousines. And I didn't really ever have time again to look back. And I reached a period when, of course, I could have learned how to drive. And then I thought, actually, I like not being able to drive. I don't need to right now. It's another distraction I don't want. So I guess you just make those decisions in life.
Who is, on your opinion, the ultimate style icon?
Well, there are some great style icons out there. I think Grace Jones is certainly one of my personal style icons. We've known her for many years, and we're lucky enough to have worked with her on the Arcadia project. But I think that what she does, every time she does it, she really cares about the detail, and there's an elegance and a beauty and an originality and a sense of humor, all of which I like in style.
I assume that one of the most exciting periods of your life was during the friendship with Andy Warhol and nights at Studio 54. So young people today can only imagine what happened back then. And I was just curious if you might share with us part of the magic of that time. Do you miss it?
I never really miss any times. I'm not a particularly nostalgic person. I am always happy to acknowledge that I have had a fantastic time during different periods, and equally times when I didn't have such a good time. But certainly that period was really interesting. It was New York felt like the center of the universe. For me, it was very exciting because I'd grown up wanting to go to New York and looking at the scene in New York with, Andy Warhol there and having the Velvet Underground and Lou Reed having come out of there. A lot of bands like the New York Dolls and Iggy Pop, although he's from Detroit, I always felt was very much from New York City. And all the art that was coming out of there. When I first went there in the early 80s, it was an unbelievable scene for modern art. That's the thing I suppose I remember most about it is meeting and becoming friends with people like Keith Haring and Jean-Michel Basquiat, who were absolutely unique artists. And coming out of that same period, people like Francesco Clemente and Julian Schnabel, who are still doing great work. Andy was sort of at the center of these things. He was one of the most curious people that I've ever met. He never lost an interest and excitement for what was new in the world. And so I suppose some of that was very helpful to see at that early stage in our career, that he was by then, I don't know, around 50-something years old, yet he seemed as young or younger than a lot of the kids that were in their 20s. And he had such a modern outlook towards everything. So being around, he was a true inspiration, no question. And some of the work that he was producing at that time, people saying, it's not very important, it doesn't really matter, it's nothing compared to the work that he did in the 60s. Well, I mean, the truth of the matter was he was still making really fantastic work. It's just that people wanted to point to the things at the beginning of his career, which they often do. I mean, people could do the same with us, with music, for sure. But I feel that it was a very creative period for most of the arts. Fashion is another thing from that time. If you look at the decade of the 80s, and particularly the early 80s, when you had people like Giorgio Armani and Gianni Versace and Jean-Paul Gaultier coming up, John Galliano was starting in the UK. It was really a very creative and individual period. It was a time when being unique and having a personality was important, rather than the 90s, which developed into more of a time when it was important to fit in and to have the same jeans and the same trainers and the same type of T-shirt. The 80s was completely the opposite of that.
When you're on tour, I'm sure each of you has a special wish list, a rider list. Can you name some of the things from yours?
I like to, when I go to a city, particularly if it's one I haven't been to before, then I like to get a sense of what the city is. And since we're only usually there for 24 hours, 48 hours if we're lucky, there's very little time outside of focusing on the concert to go out. So I like to walk around if I can and just sort of see the center of a city and what it looks like. If I've got more time, then I like to go to see an art gallery, or if there's something very specific that the city is known for, to just try and understand a little bit about the culture. You know, often we're not lucky enough to have that time, but you also have to conserve energy for the shows. So if we arrive fairly late, you can't just sort of suddenly go out for 3 or 4 hours and run yourself ragged before doing a show. It's honestly the center of it for all of us is that sort of couple of hours we have on stage, and making that the best thing we possibly can wherever we are.
Since Duran Duran were Princess Diana's favorite band, what do you think about the new princess to be in UK, Catherine Middleton?
Oh, I think we're all pretty fond of Kate Middleton, actually. I think she seems to be very elegant and eloquent too. She's obviously now a representative of Britain, and she's got a very easygoing, down-to-earth manner about her, which is important when you're in that position. I think a lot of people think that it's all I don't know, all sort of limousines and private planes and not really anything to do with working, but they all have to work extremely hard for brand Britain, and I think that in doing that, when you're tired and having been run around the world to different places representing the country, it's incredibly important that you have the right composure and the right sort of personality to connect with people and leave the right impression. So far, so good, but we'll have to see. We'll have to see in a few years' time.
So at the end of this interview, will you ever give up on makeup, or there's no such a...
It depends. I think for me, it's been one of those things that has been in my life since I was a teenager, and I don't really think about it that much. If we're going on stage, a little makeup sometimes makes things look a little more dramatic. If I'm feeling a little tired and I need to go and buy some shopping, then I'll put a hat and some sunglasses on.
It was a great pleasure to have this interview with you. We are so excited to have you on 7th of July in Skopje, and thank you very much.
It's my pleasure, and we're all truly very excited to be coming there, and we look forward to doing the show and meeting some of the people. Hi, I'm Nick Rhodes from Duran Duran, and you are listening to Metropolis Radio Network.
Duran Duran, 7 juli, Skopsko Kale.